A computer coding class. We are continuing to look at new ideas in our final projects. And although I've used some timers in some of various ones here and there, I wanted to explain timers and I wanted to show you how you could use timers to trigger spawning enemies or objects or power ups or whatever it is you might want to do. So, trigger any spawning activity. So let's take a look at this. I have here our simple standard code sculptor. So you'll want to start there um, with the height and the width defined, having those things set in the frame, and everything else. And of course, we'll put things in the draw. The first thing that we want to do that's new, aside from the basic stuff, is we want to import the random because we want to make sure that we can get to some random numbers we're going to want to do for the spawning part. The second thing we want to do is we want to talk about timers. So down here, uh, the Code Sculptor program, the simple GUI that we just imported up here, can create frames. Frames are where it can put graphics. Another thing that it can create that we haven't really looked at in class is a timer. And so you can say, hey, simple GUI, I want to create a timer. Now, when you create a timer, you need to tell it two things inside the parentheses where you put parameters. The first thing you need to say is how often you want that timer to tick. So imagine a stopwatch, works on every millisecond it goes up, or hundredth of a second. Um, or imagine a kitchen timer or something where every second it goes. So you have to say, how accurate do you want your timer to be? And it measures that in milliseconds. So if I say I want something to go every 1 second, I could put the number 1000 right here. If I want something to happen every half a second, I could put 500 right here. If I want something to happen every tenth of a second, I could put a 100 right here because it's milliseconds. So 100 milliseconds is a tenth of a second. 10 milliseconds is 0.01 hundredth of a second. 1 millisecond, and so on and so forth. So you might hear my dog. Apparently, he wants to come in, but too bad. So I'll put a second for now, just for simplicity's sake. And then the second thing you want to do is you want to name the function that will run when this time expires. It's a popular one. You might call it a tick of a clock, right? Every 1 second tick, the function tick runs. And so up here, we would create a function called tick. It has to have parentheses. And then for right now, we could put the word pass in it. Now that is the basics of creating a timer, except one more thing. You have to tell the timer to start. So you will see that down here, we want the frame to start drawing. We want the timer to start clicking, okay? But I want you to understand a couple things here. One thing is that you can have more than one timer going at a time. And this right here, timer equals, this is just a variable. So you can call your timer Fred if you want and start creating a timer. You can call it on this side anything you want. So if it makes sense for you to make timers based on power-ups, maybe you want to make something called power-up or even power-up timer. Maybe you want to make something called, let's see, enemy timer or dance timer or something like that. So depending on what you want to do, you could create a timer. And if you wanted two different things to happen in your game, you could create two different timers. So let's just say I wanted to make a timer that had some bonus thing in it. So I might call it a bonus timer. And I create the timer. Now here I use the word timer because that's what I'm creating. I'm not creating bonus, I'm creating a timer. And maybe this one, I only want to check for power-ups every 10 seconds, so I make it 100,000 milliseconds. Or maybe I want to check for something more often, and I put, every half a second. And I can't say tick because then it would do the same function. It would do whatever we told the first timer to do. So this one you need to call something else. You could be funny and call it tock for tick tock tick tock. But you don't have to do that. You can call it anything you want. You can call it bonus. So the bonus timer is going to every 500 milliseconds, half a second, call a function called bonus. And we could put that up here. All right, and then we want to start that. So down here we have to say, okay, we have a bonus timer. We want it to start the same time everything else starts. So you can see that you could do that like for 500 timers if you wanted to. Just create all sorts of timers. You could even create a countdown timer. In fact, that's what we're going to use the bonus timer for. It's really going to become a countdown. I won't rename it right now, but we're going to change it so that every 1 second we have some variable up here. Let's just call it clock, and the clock is going to go down by 1. And if the clock is equal to or less than 0, then we can just say frame stop, timer stop, and bonus timer stop. In other words, end the game, right? Now, in order to make that's a great idea, really simple to implement. But right here we should say global clock, and up here at the top we should say clock equals 30. So we've got 30 seconds to do something, right? So our clock is going to count down. We want to see it count down, like I can run this and get an error because I'm stupid and it's less than or equal to 0. And we're not going to see anything happen because we didn't put anything on the screen. Nothing is getting drawn, right? So let's fix that real quick. Canvas, draw text. We want to see the string of what the clock equals. And we want this to be located halfway. Oops, this has to be an X and a Y. Oh yeah, okay. And maybe just near the top of the page. We want it to be nice and big, so we'll make it 50 point. And we want it to be red because countdowns are always red. And there we have a countdown clock. And if I waited till it got to 0, we would theoretically stop the program. But I'm not going to waste your time on that, which is interesting. I should probably do that later because I've never actually tested something like that. There's my other one going. Okay, so that's great. We understand timers. This might be something that somebody's interested in trying to do in their game. But we were really here to find out how to spawn things depending on our timer. So what we want to do is we want to set up some new variables. We're going to have, I always create, whenever I create things I want to spawn, the first thing I create is a variable that tells me whether the thing I'm creating has been spawned or hasn't been spawned. A Boolean variable, in other words. So let's just call it bad for bad guy on. At the beginning of the game, the bad guy is not on the screen. He's false. And then, obviously, the bad guy would also have an X value, which at the beginning we'll set to 0, and a Y value, so that we can draw him at the screen at some spot, depending on where he spawns. So, here, when our first timer, called timer, when it ticks, we're going to change those things, so we might as well set up the global. So global, not sure what you can hear, but my house is going insane right now. I have to decide whether I'm going to keep doing this or whether I'm going to go out and yell at them to be quiet. Ooh, I know what I can do. Pardon me 1 second. Alexa, make an announcement.
What's the announcement?
Please be quiet.
Announcing.
All right, maybe they'll get the message. All right, back to coding. Pardon me. So we have these three variables, and here's the main one that we're going to do. This is an interesting concept, but this is where our randomness is going to come in. Sorry, before I do that. So we're going to create some number randomly. And we want that number to be between, I don't know, whatever you want to say, 1 and 500. So think about this. If we want a number between 1 and 2, then 50% of the time we'll get the number we're hoping for, and 50% of the time we'll get the other number. If I said create a number between 1 and 4, 25% of the time I'd get the number I want, and 75% of the time I'd get the number I don't want, right? So what we want to do is we want to say, okay, if that number is equal to 1, doesn't matter, I could say if that number is equal to 4, if that number is equal to 3, right? I could do any of them, but I'm just going to say if that number is equal to 1, then I have a spawn. So in this case, 25% of the time that this runs, I'll get a spawn. And all I have to do is say, oops, bad on is true. And I have to say that the bad x is going to equal something, which I'll come back to in a minute. And the bad y is equal to something, which I'll come back to in a minute. Now, I'll show you what this does. We'll have to make a drawing of something to show on the screen. But the main thing to think about is in this part of it. There's two things going on. First of all, how often is this going to decide to spawn? It's going to think about spawning every 1 second. And then every 1 second, we have a 25% chance of a spawn. So that means theoretically, every 4 seconds, mathematically speaking, I should get a spawn. Because, I should get the number 1 out of 4 times, approximately. And 1 second times 4 times would be 4 seconds. So that means that I could start this game and I could wait 4 seconds for something to spawn. So you have to play with how often do you want to check and how likely do you want that to happen. I have done games where I go all the way up to, make a number between 1 and 1,000. So there's only a 0.1% chance of something happening. But I tell it to check it very often. Or I could say, let's not check it so often, but let's have more of a chance. So now we have a 10% chance of something happening every 100th of a second. No, sorry, that's a 10th of a second. Every 10th of a second. Which means we should be able to say 0.1 seconds times a 10% chance. That means, see, it's not that. It's the opposite of that. But anyway, it's that. And that means we have a 1. So it should take 1 second to spawn something. But maybe some seconds will be crazy and will spawn more than that, and other seconds won't be so crazy and it won't spawn at all with it for a second or maybe even 2 seconds. So you have to think about how often, and the only way to tell this is to play your game once you get it created and to decide, is this happening too often? Is this not happening often enough? And that kind of thing. And you're going to play with this number. This is your chance of spawn, and this number, which is the number how often you check. So I'm going to write that in the comments. How often to check for spawn. And this one is how often, no, how much chance that it will spawn. Now, I can imagine somebody saying, I want it to spawn every single time that it goes here. And I want it to spawn every 2.5 seconds. So here, you could basically take this out. You wouldn't need it. I want a 100% chance it spawns every 2.5 seconds. So I know, like that, if I was doing a dancing sort of game with a rhythm, I would want to find out what my speed is of my rhythm, and then I would want to spawn that thing at that rhythm by saying, yes, I definitely want to spawn then. So that's something you can think about if that is what you want to do. Now the second thing to think about is, where do you want this thing to spawn? Where do you want to show up on the screen? Some of you are going to have a definite location you want to spawn on the screen, right? If I want this to spawn on the screen at the right in the middle of the screen, I would do that. And then it would always go here. Every time it spawns, it would be in the middle. Some of you might want to make a random number, so you don't know. And maybe this means anywhere on the X value it's going to spawn, but I definitely want to spawn at the top of the screen, so I'll put a 0 for this one. So it's somewhere along this, but it's definitely always at the top of the screen, right? Or maybe it's somewhere along the height, but it's always definitely at the edge of the screen over here. So it could be up and down anywhere, but it's always going to be here if I want things to fly in from this direction. So again, it might be a constant, always spawn at the same place. It might be completely random. It might be random with some chances. And there's even more opportunities than that. Here's one just real quick that I saw somebody do once. They made another number, maybe location equals random between 1 and 4. And if location was a 1, then the bad X was 0 and the bad Y was 0. So if it was a 1, it appeared in the top left corner. But if the location was a 4, then the bad X was at the width and the bad Y was at the height. It was down in the bottom corner. And if it was a 2, they would make it up in this top corner here, and if it was a 3, they'd make it back down there. So then you have things spawning in from the 4 corners. And maybe those things would converge slowly on the middle, and you had to try to shoot them before they got to the middle or something like that. So those are, there's probably a million different ways you could think about spawning. So those are some of the options that you have. I'm going to just real quick go back to the middle of the screen so you can see that this works. And then I'm going to draw and right now I'm into text. I'm just going to draw some text. And we're going to draw something at location bad X, bad Y. It's going to be big, and it's going to be yellow. So let's just see. Oh, I just changed mine to a 1 out of 1 chance. I'm going to change it to a 1 out of 10 chance. And I'm going to tell this to check every, I'm trying to decide, half a second? Okay. That should take 5 seconds or less to show up, or approximately 5 seconds. What did I do? change something so often that now I can't even see. Oh, why did I put a colon behind it? Yeah, okay. Oh my goodness gracious. This should not be indented. I don't know what's going on here. Okay. There it is. Spawn has appeared. Okay, great. It's appeared. Now what? How do I get it off the screen so that a new one can come? Well, that's going to depend on your game so much that I don't want to get into it here. But if they are falling from the sky after they spawn, you would shoot them and you would turn them off and they would respawn. If they are, you know, maybe you have to click on it and then that will turn it off. So that's what we want to work on right now is we're going to do a click on it. But depending on what you do, there's so many different ways it could go. So if clicking does not apply to you, then you might not want to even bother with this. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly here set up a frame.set mouse click handler called click. I am going to create a definition called click that gets a position. And I am going to say if the bad guy's X value. I'm doing this fast because I dealt with this in the mouse tutorials, and if you want more information, you should click on the mouse tutorials. What I'm basically doing is making an area that you can click. So here we have the mouse click is somewhere between the bad guy's X minus 25 plus 25, so it's somewhere inside the bad guys, and then the bad guy's Y is somewhere near the mouse clicks Y. So it's a quick collision detection, basically. So if that is true, then bad on equals false. And because I just made bad on false, I should also make a global bad on. So theoretically, if I did all that right, yeah, I kind of thought that. Did I put an extra? Maybe it's just mouse click. Yeah, okay. I click on it. No. Oh. Oh dear. Right here. This. I am stupid. Okay. It's getting to the point where I have to wonder if I should start all over again, but I'm not going to because you're hearing me say this. If bad guy is on, we don't want to draw the spawn every single time. We only want to draw the spawn if the bad guy is on the screen, right? So if the bad is on is true, we could do this, but we don't have to. We could just say if bad on, that means it equals true. So if this is true, then we say the word spawn. So here, bad on is false. So at the beginning, it's not going to draw spawn, and then eventually spawn's going to show up. Ooh, it's taking longer than usual. It's taking so long, I wonder if I screwed something up. Finally. Okay, then I click it. Oh, finally, I clicked in the right spot. So as long as I click right there in the middle, it goes away, and then every, half a second it's deciding whether it wants to draw it again, and I make it go away. And my game's over. I turned it off because we hit 0. All right, so there we have it. Now the next video, which is part 2 of this, is going to talk about, well, what if I want to have more bad guys than just one bad guy? So if we want to spawn more than one thing at a time, what do we do there? So that's what we're going to deal with in video 2. We're going to be able to create from that something kind of like a mole. What's that thing called? Where you hit a mole, whack a mole, because things will pop up and we'll click them and get them down again, right? So that's what we're going to try to do.